Okay, this is a fun one. I promise you that. So for the sake of consistency, I'm Hannes, this is Painting by Letters, and today we're going to be doing some Space Marines at long last. So this video will exist as a welcome to the Fang of Terror, or to put it another way, it's the most fun I've had in a very, very long time. Let's discuss the plan really quickly before we kick off. I want three things out of this experience. I want Space Marines that are clearly my own, I want a conversion project of some kind, and I want a place for me to learn and to hone the skill of dry brushing. This is my first proper big conversion project, and I think it's going to be a really fun one. I've got about 2,000 points worth to get through, so it's going to take a good long while. But it's fun, it has some ups, it has some downs, but I think the result is something that I'm genuinely really proud of. So builds like this have always kind of terrified me. I remember as a kid picking up a Eldar Farseer and just doing some basic torso swaps, and then I thought, you know what, I'll mix that up slightly and sculpt some additional elements. And 16-year-old me completely failed in that task. And you know when something just gets lodged in your head as something that you can't do? This was my version of that. I guess doing any kind of modelling or converting of this style was almost my kind of white whale, the thing that I just could not seem to get my head round how to do it properly. Despite that, I've been a massive fan of many YouTubers who do this quite often, and I always absolutely love when on Reddit people post pictures of heavily converted models, so I thought I should give it a proper go. A trick I learned in my day job is that if you ever want to learn anything, the best thing that you can do is you can pick something actually rather difficult, force yourself to do that. Even though you're not going to master the difficult thing, getting there, or failing to get there perhaps, teaches you so much. So to really take the fear out for me, I picked up a set of push-fit assault intercessors. Push-fit seemed like the ideal place to go for a project like this, not just because I've got absolutely tons of it, but because you can slot it together and pull it apart while you're working on it. That seemed like a really good idea. However, I also want to make sure that I have a combat patrol of Space Marines together in the not too distant future, so I didn't really want to pick a model from that combat patrol because I thought I would use it, so the Leviathan boxes were kind of out. I didn't want to pick up anything like a Dreadnought initially, so Assault Intercessors seemed like the really obvious place to go. Once I'd picked up and cleaned them all, the next job really was just to hack at them with my clippers. This is genuinely quite a cathartic process. I would recommend it from time to time. It was a bit of fun. Obviously having to be a bit careful, thinking about where impacts would be, what that damage would look like, really allowed me to use the clippers to sort of chunk off some proper detail. Following that, I picked out some Necron bits. While I say that, I'd picked these out from the start and had put them into a little box for safekeeping. I got these out, make sure that they were all clean and that I was happy with them, and then basically just picked up a model and tried to see where they would fit. So a Primaris Marine and a Necron are about the same size, but the Necron has longer limbs for the most part, or to be even more precise, the limbs get much more recessed into the Necron's body versus a Space Marine, which makes some of the positioning means that some of the arms can look a bit lanky and stuff like that. There's one or two models that I think suffer from that a little bit, but all said, the scale is close enough that it works. This project wouldn't have been feasible without having a wow stick. This small little electronic drill just takes the plastic away with incredible speed and precision. So if you're thinking about following along at home, given that you're going to have to pin these models because there are different types of materials present, please be aware that doing this with a hand drill, and yes, I did practice that before on another mini and it will never see the light of day, it's very hard to get the precision that you need, particularly when it comes to things like Necron's arms, for example, which are very thin. I will say, for completeness' sake, I did also use the wow stick to do some battle damage and things like that. Yeah, it's worth me being honest with the fact that it broke on me. It broke on me on the last mini when I was doing some battle damage. I got in touch with a supplier through Amazon who've basically just dicked me about for about a week and a half at this point, to the point where even Amazon have started getting involved. So a bit of a word of warning, if you do buy a WoW stick online, particularly if you're buying it through Amazon, the sellers don't seem to be particularly great. So if you do have a problem like I did here, where during normal operation within a expected period of time it suffers a catastrophic failure, it's really worth potentially trying to get it from a supplier that you can walk into the store. I don't know how that works with WoW sticks, if I'm honest with you. So if you're not comfortable with that, maybe try and pick one up from a different company. I think that's probably what I'm going to do, but I'm going to see how this whole Amazon thing levels out. Once everything was battle damaged and I had all of the different parts lined up and all the pinning was done, I then picked out the milliput. So this was the heavily intimidating bit for me. This is something that I have never really done before. So here's a couple of recommendations on a postcard from me to you if you want to follow along at home. I will be doing a video in a couple of weeks' time where I discuss this process in more detail if you want to follow along at home. However, here and now, my number one piece of advice is to shape it out like skin and then essentially use the two pieces slotting together as a method to kind of get that skin into place and then just drape and mold around one of them. That seemed to work quite well for me in a couple of places. Just to make sure the effect really landed on this unit, I also used a couple of Necron weapons, just scattered throughout. It really adds to the effect. I decided against doing any kind of painting of those weapons and just leaving them as kind of bare necrodermis and rusty in the end. You'll see in a minute, but it really helps sell the effect. So here you can see the model pre-priming. Honestly, as someone who hasn't done this much, I don't know what I expected. Probably more than that at this point in time. I think I was having a bit of a crisis of faith at this moment, but I really shouldn't have been doing. First and foremost, what I want out of this painting experience is a method to really hone a specific skill. So I've been talking in a lot of videos about dry brushing, about seeing people do more interesting things with it, and seeing how as a skill it's kind of coming into a bit of a renaissance. A lot of that is obviously due to Artis Opus, who by the way directly inspires the colour scheme that we're using here, whereas I think they attempted to do something more akin to a sort of an airbrush style painting. I'm using a very similar approach to do basically lighting effects. So making sure that the top of the model is very bright, very traditional Space Wolf, that sort of ice grey, the blue horror colour. And then in the recesses and further down the model, it's much darker. One of the things that I want to do, although it'll probably take me a couple of units or so, is to mess about with washing some of the lower parts and maybe doing a bit more recess shading as well. I chose against it on this model because I sort of wanted to see what the core effect would look like stood by itself, and if I was happy with it. I am, for the most part. Actually, I did really enjoy this. I think particularly on the heavily detailed parts of the models, they absolutely sing in person. Looking at the footage though, under the heavy lighting that you need to produce videos like this, some of the detail that's more obvious in person isn't quite as obvious on camera. There's something to think about for me there at least. For the metallic Necron-y parts, I just wanted to do something a bit more traditional, I suppose, something that I've not done before. I'm just using the primer of black as their base coat, then dry brushing over a mix of a couple of different colours. There's a brown, a silver and a gold, and together it creates quite a mottled metallic colour, which is very, very close to your sort of traditional out-of-the-book necrodermis at considerably less effort. After this we move to the sort of leather and skin tone effects. I mixed up some browns, some just coming straight out the pot, some being a mix of different colours, and then just mixed different kind of whites and blacks into it to give a bit of saturation. These are one of the few elements that I do your more traditional painting technique over. So they get based, they then get washed down with some contrast paint, and then kind of get re-highlighted up afterwards. I don't know about everyone else, but I find in particular snakebite leather works more like a wash than it does a contrast for most of the time. As such, I think it works really well for this purpose. Next we come to kind of the battle damage. Look, I know they're supposed to be made out of ceramite, whatever the hell that is, but to me, metal. Metal makes sense. They're big power armory boys and the armor is going to be made of metal. I have no justification other than that's what I want. Feel free to do it in your own way. So for all the battle damage bits, I just picked up any kind of gunmetal will do, and then just kind of washing it down. One of the nice things that I discovered at this point, because I'd hacked at these models with real tools, it left a lot of texture in the plastic. That means that Black Legion over some kind of metal or Rattling Grime absolutely sing. They produce slightly different types of metal colours, but they just look so good. So there's my recommendation for you if you are doing battle damage. Try and stick within those sort of 3 paints and I think you'll probably just have a wonderful time. So for the skin tones, I really just messed about a bit. I used a collection of different washes. I built some up from sort of deeper leathery colours. I built some up from really quite khaki colours instead. I think it'll read best as an army if there is a lot of differing skin tones. It makes it feel like it's a proper army, like it's kind of a diverse fighting force of people. It just reads better for me, and so one of the things that I will be doing during this project is experimenting with different skin tones and trying to get better at them. I didn't quite succeed at this time just because I haven't had to paint skin in quite a while, although I do think it's given quite a rotten skin effect. I'm definitely going to come back with different tones and try and improve my techniques here. We then come to the red details. My aim here was really not to overthink it. What I want to do long term is I want to have an army where the armor's quite consistent, but I think the shoulder pads should be quite different, and that should be how you differentiate an assault intercessor from an eradicator, let's say, that the shoulder pad should really be striking and different and look different. And in this case, I just went with some red trim. It's not my best work ever, I don't claim it to be. I think some more contrast is required in these reds. However, I really enjoy it as a little visual accent. It's something I'm definitely going to be reconsidering before I do another squad though, so you might see in a later video me just paint over these and do it differently. Also, when it comes to decals, I don't really want to do decals because I've always hated them. And I don't actually have any Space Wolf decals lying around, so tentatively in my head I've decided I'm going to attempt a bit of freehanding in a future video. But given the fact that I struggle with highlighting, results may vary. I ummed and ahed considerably about how to do blood effects and things like that. I know there are tons of great recipes out there, including Tamiya inks and stuff like that. But if GW makes a pot that does it all for you, why are you not going to use it? So I just did. And this stuff is really, really properly good. Although I did find in a couple of places that if you ever use too much of it all at once, it ruins the effect. So you have to use it very sparingly on edges, things like that. And it'll do all of the colour, all of the staining, and a decent amount of glossiness as well. It's really good. The final touch that really worked to sell the whole model is I picked the brightest highlight colour, that being Blue Horror, and used it to sort of sketch out some scratches around the battle damage. I think because I'd already done quite a lot of battle damage, it meant that I really didn't have to overthink this at all. I could find the scratches in the plastic that already existed in some cases, or just give the dents and scratches a bit more of a three-dimensional look and just let them pop a little bit. Nicely, this is something that my inability to hold a brush steady doesn't seem to stop me from doing. Before we cut to the full reveal of these models, I'll just talk really briefly about the basing. Half of the models are on tactical rocks and half of them aren't. I'm a big fan of that cork look. I know some really don't like it. I'm sorry if you're in that camp. I really do. So sometimes people can really struggle with cork, and I think that's where lots of the problems come from. So here's my recommendation. It works an absolute treat. Use Vallejo's Air Primer through a brush. It seals cork up so good. Then you can wash that down with some Black Legion and then build up the greys following it, you get what's almost quite a nice cold stone texture with very, very minimal effort. Other than that, just basing as I've done in other videos. As always, if you're going to be using something like Geek Gaming Scenics like I am here, a couple of pieces of advice: paint your base before you put it on. Otherwise, if you have any application errors, you've got the absolute nightmare of trying to drop some dirt in a really small area. So make sure that your base is painted, because if anything rubs off, put down your PVA mixture, whatever it is. I'm just using the Geek Gaming one. Then put down your tufts, then your ground cover, and let that properly dry. You will see people online recommend using things like scenic sealant on models. Don't do this. You will spray some of it on the model and you will create bits of gloss that are nigh on impossible to get rid of. Speaking from multiple times of personal experience, the other thing with that is it can get slightly cloudy if it's not on something that it can soak into, like for example the traditional basing materials. So again, just be careful. I feel it's really important to be clear about my influences, because what I've tried to do here is I've tried to bring in several different ideas from the internet and things that I've had myself in the past. So first and foremost, I did say it in the main body of it, but the idea to paint Space Wolves all as dry brushing is originally Otter's Opus's. I'm using a modified version of the style that they developed, but it is still heavily influenced by them. The idea to mold skin in this way is entirely from Midwinter Minis, although I did find a couple of their tips and tricks didn't quite work for me, so much like with the painting style, I ended up modifying that a bit for my own needs as well. Finally, I guess I should say where the actual idea for this really came from. So I was playing about with this idea when the Leagues of Votann came out, and my idea was that I was going to kit bash an army where the Leagues had always been dead, that they were just sort of reanimating with Necrons climbing inside them, but they'd actually been dead all along. And then obviously I received the models and they're tiny, so it just didn't work. And I really kind of sat on that idea of wanting to do the kind of rebirth sort of zombie legion thing, and then when chatting to a friend a couple of months ago, I sort of joked about doing it with Space Marines, and they absolutely loved the idea. So yeah, it kind of comes from a whole list of different places, and I think, to be honest, that is probably YouTube and this community at its best, right? We approach YouTube and Reddit and sites like it, we can get inspiration and ideas and we can do our own thing. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to do something like this. I'm sure there is someone else, but I really would recommend it. It is so much good fun. It is so creative, and it's surprisingly attainable as someone who has no fucking previous experience with most modeling compounds and things like that. I've obviously been preparing for this project for some time. Some of the previous videos on this channel were basically me just doing research preparing for this. So I am really curious what people actually think. Okay, so I'm not gonna hide this at all. I am really proud of this. Me and my wife, when we've been sort of buzzing around the living room as I've been making them and painting them and slowly putting them together, have both been remarking about the fact that they just look a bit more distinctive than lots of models do. They clearly look like something that is not necessarily completely original, but something that really stands out. I just think they're really cool. I love them so much. I'm aware that I've tied myself into an absolutely horrific project when you think about the other models here. And yeah, they're all going to be like this. I've decided this now because I really enjoyed this. There's definitely some points for improvement. Some of the sculpting wasn't brilliant. I think the reds they're a bit too flat. I did edge highlight them, but it just doesn't really stand out, so I need to think about that a little bit. This was really good fun. And I sort of finally understand how people can paint eye lenses as well, because the eye lenses are big enough to get a paintbrush back in. So I'm going to do another video where I'm going to talk about some of the tools that I used in this as a bit of a kind of a review, because I had some problems. But for the most part, this is just brilliant fun. I'd recommend picking a project like this up and potentially having a go. Anyway, to round this video off, I'm going to have the sort of the narrative chunk that would finish off the video from a couple of weeks ago, and then I'm just going to round off with some final thoughts. See you in a minute. So once these Marines were settled, they began to search deeper and deeper through the mines that stretched underneath the base that they had settled into, to discover as well more of what the Violet Wyverns were digging for and why they had built such a large stock of materials. Their base of Tech Marines searched throughout the lower spaces, finding deeper and deeper chasms full of yet more technology that they just couldn't explain. The halls of the Fang of Terror were rife with discourse surrounding what on earth they could have discovered here. And then the Tech Marine Corps that was travelling through the base of almost the planet at that point started to disappear. After about 20 of them had gone, an investigation squad was sent. A collection of assault intercessors sent deep underneath the ground were supposed to investigate every aspect of the fort and find the Tech Marines that had disappeared. As those on the surface listened in, some vox screams were all that was heard of them. A final gasp of their existence before clearly being extinguished. The order was sent out. The entire legion was to prepare. Something was coming and they didn't know what. Entrenched in power armor and prepared for a fight. They were ready for anything, or so they thought. You see, the humans of this planet had kept themselves safe, mostly by using the structures that the Fang of Terror hadn't understood when they'd landed. Structures of curious metal. It was, of course, necrodermis. The humans of this planet had found a way to alter it itself, and in so doing, although in a very low technological manner, the flayer virus infected Necrons were terrified of these small human outcrops. But the Fang of Terror Marines had no such power. They had landed with the technological support that would inspire those of Mars, but realistically there was nothing there that you wouldn't find in any other Space Marine chapter of the second founding. And as such, the Flayer Necrons hit them so hard they died in minutes. You see, the entire inside of the planet was a tomb world full of Necrons that were entirely infected. But the infection had mutated to a degree. They had developed some sort of intelligence, something that allowed them to plot and to create methods of delivering the very thing that they wanted. These Necrons, although infected, were intelligent enough to realise, even through their gore-addled minds, that Marines coming meant more flesh, more gore, and more to wrap round themselves. They too had heard the messages from the Blood Angel's captain who was coming, and so, as that captain landed, the Flayers climbed inside the very Fang of Terror Marines, slotting inside the sinew in the armour, so their next victims would come ever closer. The Space Marines who had landed there first as the Fang of Terror were now the corpse masks of the Necron Flayers of this planet. So yeah, if you made it this far, thank you so much. This was a brilliant project. I'm going to be doing more of these. I've got ideas about how to convert different unit types. I've got all of the units in these boxes to do. We're also going to be doing the other half of the Leviathan boxes as a bit of a speed paint as well. Not as in all in one, but I'll be deliberately picking a style that's much quicker and easier to produce. But for now, I'll just say this has been a complete and utter pleasure. I couldn't recommend this enough. I've been Hannes, this has been Painting by Letters, and keep safe out there.